Welcome to those that have just joined us, and we're going to move on to the subject of acoustic engineering. So I'm going to introduce this evening's main speaker, which is Professor Trevor Cox. And I apologise, Trevor, I'm going to read from a little script here because I've got a memory like the proverbial sieve. So also it will tell me how good Google is at telling me how of your expertise and your background.
I hope
so you can either nod or shake your head as we go through. So Trevor is a Professor of Acoustic Engineering at the University of Salford. He is a past president of the UK's Institute of Acoustics and was awarded the Institute of Acoustics Tyndall Medal for his achievements and services in the field of acoustics. His research covers architectural acoustics, psychoacoustics and audio. He has been the principal investigator on 10+ EPSRC projects and built environment acoustics. Trevor co-wrote the definitive text on room acoustic absorbers and diffusers, which was published by the CRC Press. He won an SPRC Senior Media Fellow and has presented more than 25 documentaries for the BBC, including The Physicist's Guide to the Orchestra. He won an ASA Science Writing Award for his popular science book Sonic Wonderland, in which... Good, I got the plug in, there we go. Brown envelope, no, I'm not joking. And the book describes an oil tank where he broke, according to this, the Guinness World Record for the longest echo.
You shall learn about that at the end of today.
Fabulous. I'm hoping the AI worked here and that was mostly right. If it's not, I'm sure Trevor will correct me. But as we normally do here, ladies and gents, a nice warm Keele welcome to Professor Trevor Cox.
Yeah, so my when I'm doing my day job at the University of Salford, I'm doing things like working on hearing aids, working on making machines sound better, or I'm working on architectural acoustics. So if you take any space like this lecture theatre here, you'll notice there's some absorbers in the corners there that are there to try and make it sound better. Or you might work in a grand space. So I worked in this concert hall, and the things that look like crispy bacon bits hanging in the ceiling are diffusers, and that was what my PhD research was about. And this is a hall across America where it was designed. But this talk is not going to be about necessarily how to make an acoustic function best for speech or music, which is what's going to hear. It's going to be about odd acoustic things you get within places. And my journey actually started in a sewer. So I was invited to do an interview for Resonance FM in the London sewer. It was the most peculiar visit because we literally walked into the park. He opened up a manhole cover and said, "We're going down there." I thought it was some official visit, but we literally, on a sort of midday afternoon, walked in under a park in London and walked down a storm drain. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but the acoustics were quite amazing. Now, there's an effect that I expected to get, which is an echo. So you're in a big tunnel, you shout echo, the sound goes down, hits something, comes back delayed. That's what I kind of expected to have. But there was a weird spiralling effect. So as my voice disappeared, it seemed to be going round and round and round the inside of this tunnel. And I was kind of wondering, well, what's going on there? And I was in the middle of a radio interview, so I made something up, and I'll tell you what the answer is, and luckily what I made up was kind of right. But as we came out the sewer, it kind of made me wonder, here's an acoustic phenomenon I had never witnessed before. I've been in it, in this field for decades. What other weird acoustic aberrations have I been overlooked? So having got into a shower for about an hour and scrubbed off a sewer, it's not very pleasant, I would say, down there, I then came up with this idea of I should go and investigate the most amazing sounds in the world. And I expected it would be an easy sort of afternoon playing around the internet, but it turned out that no one had actually really looked at this. So I collected them together and wrote this book, which then came out. So I'm going to take you on a journey around some of the places I visited with weird acoustics. It's going to be a rough journey around the world. These are roughly where we're going, so we're going to go over to America in a moment. Quite a lot of them in Britain, a few bits in Europe, and we're going to talk about some of these places. So let's first of all go across to Salt Lake City. Because if you have a phrase like this building has an international reputation as one of the most acoustically perfect buildings in the world, you have to go and visit it, don't you? So this is the Mormon Tabernacle in Salt Lake City. And you can see it's got this kind of strange domed roof at the top. And it has got some strange acoustics, but it's not that surprising really when you think that we've probably understood this many centuries ago. So if you look here, This is Anthius Kircher, a sort of scholar from the 17th century, describing what you get in the Mormon tabernacle. If you stand at one focal point, imagine playing billiards in this sort of weird shaped curve. If you stand at one focal point and send the ball off, it always goes to the other focal point that you get in the ellipse. So all the sound going to the ceiling goes from this person to that person very efficiently. And that's what you get in the Mormon tabernacle. You've got an elliptical ceiling which transmits sound very effectively from one point to the other. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's a graph of a computer model. Now, don't worry about what this number is on the right-hand side. All you need to know is red is poor and blue is good, roughly, in terms of how loud it is. So if you're in the Mormon tabernacle and you stood right in the middle of the, I'm going to call it the stage, because I don't know, it must be the altar, I guess, the blue square thing in the middle there, then if you talk there, there's a really distinct focal effect. And if you look down right near me, actually I can reach it here, there's a focal point where it's light blue again. So that's where the focal point happens. Now, if you go and visit it, they will actually demonstrate it for you. They'll rip bits of paper on stage. Make sure you go on the balcony, because I don't actually know where the focal point is. And I had to point out, I need to go upstairs to experience this. So that's one sort of weird acoustic phenomena that happens because of focusing. But actually, when you design a room, you avoid this. Why? Because the people over here are very happy. They can hear everything really clearly. The people over here can't. So it doesn't work, because it doesn't work for one-to-many communication. So when we have these sort of dome ceilings, we normally do something about it. Actually, Mike, you mentioned Royal Albert Hall, didn't you, when we were having a meal earlier on? So the Royal Albert Hall down in London, a big domed roof. It holds about 8,000 people, vast concert venue. That dome focuses sound. So if you go in there before the late 1960s, basically you would hear the orchestra multiple times. You'd hear it's coming from the stage and these focused reflections from the ceiling. I mean, you get value for money because you hear every bit of music twice, but maybe that's not such a good expense. So actually the BBC did these. They brought in what are called the mushrooms, these thick clouds hanging down, and basically it blocks the path from sound going from the stage to the dome, and therefore you don't get these echoes. They're 95% effective. It's actually a very difficult room to treat. So there are places with still echoes, but quite a lot of places work much better. So that's the kind of thing we do normally when we design a room, is we try to get rid of this effect because it's not really good news. But if you're like me, you go, well, obviously rooms which have curves are interesting. What's the biggest curve you can go to? Well, maybe a sphere would be a good start. So I've been to a completely spherical room, but the one I'm going to show you here, I've got a recording in. There's a completely spherical dome you can go to in Boston, but they don't allow you to record in it, which is a bit annoying. So I went here instead, which is Teufelsberg. And someone who's a German will now correct my pronunciation. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's on the outskirts of Berlin, and it was a listening station. So this was in it was actually in British territory post-Second World War, and they were spying on the east from Berlin. So if you don't know your geometry, Berlin was right in the middle of the East Europe. It was just a sort of isolated island, effectively. And when you've got these big things picking up, I mean, they're picking up radar and electromagnetic signals, they have these big antennae, they have to protect the antennae for things like snow and wind, so they stick a dome on top. And so this is the thing right at the top there, you can see it's got a radome. So it's an almost spherical room. And you can go and visit it. Now, if you like visiting it and you're scared of heights, you might want to point out the state of this place is. There's sheer drop. They're actually in that dome on the other side. There's a hole in the wall, and you can look down several hundred metres. I mean, it really is not for the faint-hearted or not to take small kids to. But I went in there, and when I go into this room, I had a little digital recorder with me. And so I was right in the middle, because the focal point's in the middle. I knew that's really interesting. And I unzipped my bag, and then it seemed to be the unzipping from above my head. There's the most weird kind of effect goes on. And I'll give you a sense that I can't give you that sense because you need to be really there to experience it. But what I do carry with me, as well as my digital recorder, is a balloon, or several balloons. And so I burst a balloon in there, and what you'll hear is the effect of the sound, first of all, coming from me, going up to the dome, and then being focused straight back to me. Going to the dome, being focused straight back to me. And you can see it. There's direct first, second, third, fourth, fifth reflections. So each judder you hear is a focused sound coming back again. I'm going to play it 3 times. You'll hear it 3 times in case you miss it the first time. So it's a really nice effect, nice judging effect. It's all to do with an acoustic focus. But the other things you can do in there is, because if you're stood right in the middle, you're at the focal point, if you move slightly to the side, the focal point goes to your ear, so you can actually whisper into your own ear, and you can go this way and whisper into the other ear. It's kind of quite a weird room to play with. If you go onto YouTube, you'll find lots of musicians playing around with it. It's quite a common sort of place for people to kind of record strange things. But you have to go to Berlin for that, so let me get you something a bit nearer to home. This is up near Sheffield, near Penistone, and it's part of the National Cycle Network, so you can either cycle down it or walk down it if you want. And I came to this place after I wrote the book, and I did a Channel 5 recording. They were walking Britain's lost railways, and they said, this place sounds weird, do you want to come down and do an interview there? So I went down, and again, a bit like the sewer, I didn't actually know what was going on, and I had to make it up, but fortunately, I seem to have made it up correctly when I analysed it a bit better later on. Now, the key to this tunnel is, can you see how it curves in? It's like a horseshoe shape. Now that's not like most tunnels. Most tunnels are kind of semicircular, but it bends in. It's got a bow on the side, and that's what gives it an interesting effect. Now nowadays, if you want to be a sonic explorer, you can go on YouTube. There's lots of options. When I was doing it, there was less options, but here is someone making a weird sound in there, and you'll hear obviously a lot of reverberance, a lot of echoiness, but the thing to listen out for is his voice has got a warble on it. It's not constant, go wah, 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 wah. You'll hear it warbling. Ho! Almost metallic sound to it. Now that's something which is really unusual, a warble. Now I've identified it, I can find other places, which I'll show you some other ones that have it as well. Now here's actually the measurement. Now just look at the black line at the bottom, forget the other two, they're just predictions, we don't have to worry about that. And this is me measuring it again. I did a bit more sophisticated this time, but you can imagine I burst a balloon and I'm just looking at the energy over time. Can you see there's lots of peaks and bumps and peaks and bumps? Those are the warble sounds that you can have going along. And you can see actually my prediction models predicted well. I did a paper on this one. So what's going on there? What's causing the warble? Well, it has to come something to do with this shape. And I don't know if anyone got a physics background who's done billiard tracing before, which is kind of a field of mathematics where you see, essentially it's how billiard balls or snooker balls move around a space. And there's all sorts of kind of things about looking at ergodicity. Well, I use those kind of techniques. And I could show you what goes on here. So we've got a source in the middle, and you can measure the receiver is the sort of lilac coloured or purple coloured thing. So the sound goes direct to the receiver, and then it goes wandering back and forth. And eventually, it keeps and it returns to the receiver. It's got what's called a closed path. So it keeps repeating and then it comes back again. So it keeps going round and round, and every so often will come back to the receiver. And that's the key, is this closed loop. If it went past every time, so it was square walls, it would be a bit like being in a stairwell. You know when you clap in a stairwell, you get a high-pitched tone? You get that effect. The reason it's a warble is because of the delay between the reflections and how your ear processes sound. It's far enough apart that your ear hears them as separate kind of warbling events. And it's because reason you get this is it's because of the bowed sides. Means it doesn't go up to the ceiling very readily, it doesn't go to the floor, it just stays in this horizontal, but it takes many pathways before it gets back to you. So, if you want to go and visit one of these places, go along National Cycle Network near Penistone and go and find the tunnel, and you can play around with it. So there's another place which I met after I wrote the book. So one of the things when you do a book like this is you go and do promotions, and I got invited to go and talk at the Oslo Contemporary Music Festival, which is kind of not something I would normally talk at, I'm a physicist. But anyway, and I was in the bar afterwards having done my talk, and someone came up to me and said, whatever you do, you must go to this place, which is the place on the picture, because it's got the most amazing acoustic. And so I'm going to do you a little piece, which I recorded there, and then explain what's going on. So you're going to hear me talking. I'm going to start off at the bottom of this picture. I'm going to walk into the middle where you can see the circle is at the centre and walk out again. This is a little piece I recorded to explain what is going on.
I'm in the booking hall of an Oslo train station, and you can just hear me chatting here, but as I approach the middle of this space, I think you can hear how my voice is suddenly amplified and then distorted by the shape. It's a cylinder, and actually if you look at the floor, there's a plaque saying acoustic sculpture. So it's not an accident, it was deliberately designed. Quite amazing. I shall wander out again and you should be able to hear it disappear. As I've got to keep talking, of course, for that. But you can hear how the dramatic sound effect is suddenly gone. And it's like I'm in a normal room again. So this is the National Theatre railway station, the entrance near the American Embassy in Oslo.
Now, if you should, like me, go on a trip to Oslo to listen to crazy places, don't go to the American Embassy, it's moved. So don't follow my route. Now, in that little bit, I was kind of trying to work out what was going on there, bleary-eyed and slightly hungover from the night before. So I took some recording and came back to try and work it out and try and see what happens. So the first thing is it looks like a cylinder. When you stood in it, it's obviously a cylindrical space. So you think, well, maybe it's a focal effect. But it doesn't sound like the Teufelsberg. It sounds different. And I'm going to burst a balloon in two places so you can actually hear the difference. So this is Teufelsberg on the left-hand side. You've already heard that kind of effect. This is still Teufelsberg, just doing it 3 times. So that's a kind of circular focal room I was expecting. Here's a balloon in the right-hand Oslo place. Got a warble in it. So I knew something was going on there. So there's a high-pitched tone, by the way, which comes from this sort of kind of step ceiling, but it's the warble I'm going to talk about today. And I kind of, well, what's going on? What's creating that effect? So I actually contacted the architect, and he was very kind and did me a Skype call. We chatted about it, and I learned a couple of things that I didn't know. First of all, it was not an acoustic sculpture. So what happened was he built this circular booking hall. So these were old ticket offices. And it was a disaster because it had this horrible warble in it. And actually the Norwegian Railway were going to sue him for quite a lot of money for making such a disastrous space. And then sound artists found it and started doing recordings there. So the railway people put a sign in the middle to say it was an acoustic sculpture so people would stop complaining about it. So that's actually the truth of the story, which I obviously didn't know at the time. But the other thing is he sent me a nice diagram of it. So left-hand side is the entrance, right-hand side is the escalators you may have heard. But what's interesting, because it's a booking hall, there's actually 2 diameters going on here. So there's a bigger diameter at the bottom than there is at the top, which I didn't realise. Radius might be a better way of describing it. There's a bigger curve at the bottom than at the top, which I didn't kind of realise. And this is what's part of what's behind the effect. So if you think about sound going out, there's a short path where it goes to the nearest wall and comes back. And there's a longer path, a delayed path, when it goes to the bottom and comes back. But if you think of second-order reflections, the one which goes in that direction, to the short one, to the long one and back again, is the same length as the one which goes in the opposite direction. So what you have is you had 2 quiet arrivals and then 1 bigger arrival, 2 quiet arrivals and 1 bigger arrival, which is the sum of 2 reflections going on. And that's part of what's behind the warble in that space. So you need something a bit odd. A pure circular room doesn't give it. You need something a bit odd going on to get those sort of effects. Now, I was interested you struggle with architectural acoustics, because one of my areas is even harder to pronounce, archaeological acoustics, or archaeoacoustics, which is an even harder one to say. So this is Stonehenge, which I've done some work on, and it came to my attention, there was a paper where people said, well, in the olden days, when all the stones were there would have been a focal effect. And there's a paper actually in a journal which kind of demonstrates what's going on. So, you've got a curved mirror like I've been talking about, showing you rooms, left-hand side, that'll give you a focal point in the middle. And the picture in the paper said, oh look, there's a circular, when it was complete, there's a circular set of stones, there'll be a focal point in the middle of Stonehenge. And produced some graphs, which I won't show to you, which were obviously not quite right. And my feeling as acoustician was, nah. So I was kind of wondering, well, what do I do about it? It's this paper here, I could write to the editor, I could complain about it, and maybe they'll withdraw it, I don't know. Probably wasting my time, aren't I? I'll be much better off to go and prove it. So I built a whole model of Stonehenge to prove that this scientist was incorrect. So that's about 6 months worth of work to make this thing, just to make my point. And if you want to read about it, there's a decent archaeological journal publishing it. So this is a 1 to 12 scale model of Stonehenge. What you do with scale modelling is you basically shrink everything. But when you shrink everything, you have to think that the wavelength of sound has to be the same size relative to the stone. So you have to shrink the wavelength of sound. So you work at 12 times the frequency. So when you test this thing, you're working at ultrasonic frequencies. So you might see there, it might be a bit small, I'm holding a little loudspeaker in my hand, but it's a tiny loudspeaker, because I'm testing up to 70, 80 kilohertz in this space. I'm not testing at normal frequencies. But actually, this is a technique, we were talking about old days at Salford. I bet you had models like this when at Salford. They certainly were doing it in the 70s. This is a technique in room acoustics that goes back to the 30s or 40s. And so I've made a lot of measurements. I won't go into the detail because I'm talking about aberration today, but I wanted to say there aren't any focused reflections. And I'll explain why there aren't any just by showing a picture from within the model. So the claim the person was making was the outer circle would be a focal circle. You can just about see the outer sarsen circle, can't you, there, peeping between the stones. The problem is there's lots of things in the way between the outer circles and the inner circle, and they scatter the sound all over the place. And that's what they weren't explaining correct. And that's when I looked at the paper and I thought, no. So you don't get a focal effect because there's too many other stones that would have been in the way. But I can just play you what it was like, and you can hear there isn't really a focal effect. So I'm going to play you a little extract we did for Radio 4 of a discussion around the voice, and you can hear what actually really happens in the place. So I measured and did an auralization process. So at the start of this bit, you'll hear just a normal studio voice, and then I add the effects of the stones on. So you can imagine the first discussion is outdoors, we're just chatting, and then the stones appear, and you'll hear the change in the voice, and it's kind of like, I don't know, singing and then going in the bathroom, how the tone of your voice changes. It's the same kind of effect.
Okay, now we are recording this interview. We're not actually live on Radio 4 right now. And you've now got a Stonehenge filter, which you can add onto the acoustics that we're recording right now. So could you just talk us through that process? And halfway through your answer, I want you to switch to Stonehenge.
So what we do when we measure a model is we measure what's called the impulse response. And if you're doing it in a real room, you could say burst of blue to make an impulse, and on a microphone measure the sound that you pick up. And it's similar in the scale model, but you use different signals and stuff like that. So this gives you what would happen if you made a large bang in a space. And what we can do is once we've measured it in the model, we can then apply that to anyone's voice. So we record someone's voice in a fairly dry condition like we do here. And then by a process called auralization, we transform them into the space. And you'll hear what happens to my voice is it gets a bit bassier, and you can hear it gets a little bit louder. It's not a huge change, but it's certainly noticeable.
Okay, so and it's on me now, and I sound much more bassier.
And he drops his voice, trying to emphasise the effect.
What would sound like in Stonehenge?
So you get a sense of what kind of you can play around with these sort of kind of things. And actually that technique of auralization is actually all over the place in music production. So it's called convolution reverb. It's nothing particularly new. If you're into computer games, absolutely everywhere in computer gaming nowadays. But it actually started off as a scientific testing technique is where it kind of started off. It started off in physics. So when I started off this sort of discussion of curved surfaces, I talked about the sewer and this spiralling effect. And what I kind of came to the conclusion, again, wasn't sure at the time I was making the interview, was this must be a whispering gallery effect. And a whispering gallery, I don't know, has anyone been to the whispering gallery at St Paul's Cathedral? So if you go, one of my strong recommendations is go with a friend. I went on my own. It's very hard to test the whispering gallery on your own. Go early in the morning because it gets too noisy, so go in very early in the day. But a whispering gallery, this is upstairs in St Paul's, it's at the bottom of the dome, it's a big curved surface, and you go to one side of the wall and you whisper into it, and then 30 metres away on the other side, it appears like your voice is jumping out of the wall at your friends. And it's, there's whispering galleries all over the place. There's one in Grand Central in New York, for example. Actually, once you know they're there, you can find lots of places with whispering galleries. But this is one of the few ones which is mentioned in tourist guides. So what's going on with that is the sound is skimming around the edge of the wall, and that's what was happening in the sewer. The sound was skimming around the inside, so it was a whispering gallery mode in the sewer. There's several ways of describing how it does. The easiest way is to go back to billiard balls. You can solve it with wave equations if you want. But essentially, if you imagine playing a game of snooker, I'm down at the bottom, I'm playing my snooker ball, I whisper into the wall, so my snooker ball goes sort of tangential. The sound never gets to the middle. It just sticks around the edge. You just do angle of instances, angle of reflection, and it just goes around the edge. And that's the simplest explanation of a whispering gallery that you can get. So great to go and see the whispering gallery at St Paul's, because it kind of confirmed some of the things I thought was going on. But it's much better to go to one where you can make a lot of noise. So if you can't, you can go and whisper in it, but they don't tend to like you measuring. If you make measurements like I do, you have to sort of kind of wear hidden microphones and stuff, and they do object to you shouting, and they certainly don't want you bursting balloons. But in Teufelsberg, that sort of kind of Berlin place, it's got the same spherical thing, it's slightly smaller diameter, but I burst a balloon. So in that big radome, on one side I found a jutting out bit of metal, and I stuck my digital recorder, went to the other side and burst a balloon. And this is what you hear. And actually what you hear is it doing laps. So each time you hear a judder, the sound's gone once around the dome, and you'll hear it goes around quite a few times. Oh, it didn't play. I thought I was going to play twice. So each judder is another lap around the dome. It's a shame you can't do it at St Paul's, because it would be further between them, but there we go. You can go and do it somewhere else. So whispering galleries were something which really interested people like Lord Rayleigh and people like that, and they're sort of kind of writing about this kind of, turn of the 19th century kind of stuff. And it led to sort of lots of discussions about what was going on in sort of kind of weird places. This is a 1940s, I think, if I remember rightly, article from the Journal of Acoustic Society America, which is the premier journal in my field. And don't worry about reading the paper, obviously, but it was talking about this bridge called Echo Bridge. And it was saying, well, what's going on there? And essentially the arguments were about, is it a whispering gallery? So the sound's going A, B, C, B, A when you chat. Or is it just an echo going A, D, C, D, A, going horizontally? So is it going round the bend or just horizontally? And that's what this argument's about, and they're trying how to measure it and how they're struggling to work out what's going on. To give you a sense of what it's like, you can go and visit it. This is one I haven't visited, but I've got something from YouTube. It's really unusual as a tourist venue because it has a listening platform. We've all been to viewing platforms to see views. How often have you been to a listening platform? This is purely down here to listen to the echo. It's quite amazing. And people like to do things like torture dogs there, as I shall play.
It's okay.
It's all right, baby. You good boy. There's really nobody there.
What?
Oh well, we'll leave that poor dog suffering on its own. So I came back from, I saw that online. It's not one I've actually visited. I've not been there, unfortunately. And I wanted to work out what was going on. So the people, when they did it in the 1940s, they were really struggling. But now we have computer modelling. So actually, another way to deal with Stonehenge is actually do a computer model of it. So actually, olden days, we used to build these scale models and measure them a lot. In acoustics, we do a lot of computers, as you do in all engineering. And this is a finite difference time domain model that John Schieffer did for me of this. And so what you'll see is sound being created over here and on the left-hand side. And the question is, where's the sound reflecting? Is it coming back across the water at the bottom, or is it going around the edge? So there's the sound going out. You'll see an aberration for the finite difference time domain model there. We'll ignore that. Doesn't matter. There you go. What's happening? How does it reflect? Well, some of it's going along the water, and some of it's going around the edge of the top. So this is one of the reasons I think they struggled, is because the sound goes by both paths. It's not a question of one or the other, it's actually both paths. And actually, if you get them right, the dimensions, they arrive kind of back not too dissimilar, not too far apart, and your ear integrates them. So the actual answer to this problem of what happens to the echo bridge is actually, it's not one or the other, it's both. Now, if you like this effect, you could go to Massachusetts, but actually you can find lots of bridges do that. Next time you're on a canal, and you've got a very wide canal, there's loads of them in Castlefield, for example, in Manchester, you can find this effect all over the place once you start kind of looking for it. Now, so far, I've shown you lots of weird curved surfaces that have just I've come across by accident. It also made me think, well, my role normally is to design things. You saw at the start those crispy bacon bits are designed. So I thought, can you design a whispering gallery which isn't like one that exists? So I came up with a prototype. I've never built this yet. Maybe I should build it one side, which is an S-shaped curve. So the idea here is you're talking at the top on the right-hand side. The sound skims around that top curve, and then it jumps and skims around the other side of the bottom curve. So you get it kind of skimming around both of them. And the person who, I put an arrow there because you couldn't see them if they're behind that, would still be able to hear the whispering gallery effect. And so that was my kind of hypothesis. Maybe this would be a way of making a whispering gallery which would be a completely different shape to what people had done before. So be a computer modeler, which is what I do. My background's in numerical modelling. I actually did some modelling to see if it would work. I don't tend to take the graph apart in very great detail. But on the left-hand side is just a normal whispering gallery, a normal curve. So you're looking from the left to the right of this left-hand graph. You're in the middle of the dome. On the right-hand side, you're on the edge of the curve. And you see that rise that goes on in the level. That's the whispering gallery effect and the sound being concentrated around the edge when the source is at the edge. So that fact you've got it scooping up when it gets to near 15 metres is the demonstration that a whispering gallery is working. There's my right-hand side being projected using the same technique, and you see the same scooping up effect, showing how the energy is being consigned close to the sides. So it should work. And one day I'll convince an artist to make it, and I'll actually test it. I'm actually in discussion with an artist now about making a whispering gallery. He doesn't want this one, unfortunately, so I won't kind of get to make it. So that's curved surfaces. So if you want to look for things with aberrations, and there's lots of places which are documented, look for curves, because they focus, they do weird things, and then they play around with your hearing in sort of weird kind of ways. Now, when I first thought of this idea of writing a book called Sonic Wonderland, the first thing I thought about doing was about what's called reverberation. And the reason for that is kind of fundamental to architectural acoustics, but also because we have some really weird rooms at Salford University. So this is our latest, I don't know if you've seen this one, this is the latest anechoic chamber at Salford. So this is a room where every surface is absorbing, the floor, the walls and the ceiling, and when you talk in there, it's a really odd effect. It sounds like your ears are blocked. It's the place where there's a sort of meme that you can't survive in there for 45 minutes and you'll go mad and all that kind of stuff. I'm afraid the boring truth is you can very easily spend a long time in that place. And we do spend a lot of time in that place because your brain gets used to it. But some people don't like it. Some people, when shown round, go, this is nice, can I now leave? But it's a great place to go into. So because it's all very absorbing, it's got no reverberation. And it's quite surprising when you do something like burst a balloon in there, how little you get. I'll give you an example here. Here is a starting pistol going off in it. I'm going to play it 3 times. And it makes you realise what Hollywood does to a gun to make it more interesting. Yeah? Oh, there's only 2 there. Don't know why it's the 3rd one. That little click is the gun going off. And so when you actually in a real room, a lot of the gun sound is the boom of the room. It's the room you excite. The same is true when you burst a balloon. A lot about what the balloon sound is actually the room reverberance in response. So that's what I'm interested in, is how the room responds. And I can nip next door to this one at Salford, and there's a room called the reverberation chamber, which is, it's not that big a space. It's probably in terms of sort of length and width, kind of size of this room, of this place here. It's a bit taller, but it's really reverberant. So you go in there and it's a bit like walking into a cathedral. So if you make a sound in there, the sound kind of lasts for maybe, it depends on what we've got in there, but let me say 6 seconds before dying away, 10 seconds before dying away. And I kind of thought, well, that's interesting. They're 2 very interesting rooms, but maybe we could find rooms which are even more reverberant. So what's the most reverberant space? So I have a Salford, the deadest space you can get. What's the most lively space I can find? So I thought it was an IOP event. I should put an equation up. There we go, one equation. Reverberation time is this measure of how reverberant stuff is, and it's basically you make a sound and you wait for it to decay by 60 decibels, and it's that time which is the reverberation time. So if I go to, say, Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, which is the big classical music venue there, or you go down to Birmingham Symphony Hall, which might be a bit nearer you here, then the sound will last 2.5 seconds when the orchestra's finished, and that's roughly the reverberation time. If I'm in this space, oh, it's quite long. Maybe 1 second, 1 point, something like that in this space. If you go home into your bedroom, probably 0.3 seconds. You know, that's kind of typically what you get. So what if we want is a big reverberation time, and then Wallace Clements being worked in Harvard University to derive this equation. There's basically 2 drivers, forget the constant. There's volume, so big rooms have a lot of reverberation, or there's low absorption. You want nothing to absorb the sound. So in this room, we've got carpets, us, there's even deliberate absorption on the walls, I've pointed out already, all dampening the sound in here. So what we want is a space that doesn't have any of that. So where there's a space which hasn't got any windows, which is big, well, how about a mausoleum? So quite a few of the places I've been to are mausoleums. None of them had dead bodies in them. Oh, no, actually one did. Actually had a dead body. So this is Hamilton Mausoleum. You can visit it. It's in Glasgow. And it used to have the world record for the longest echo. And what you're seeing down the right-hand side is a weird loudspeaker to measure it. And I visited it. So when you go to acoustic conferences, one of the funny things is that quite often you have sort of weird visits to do. And we don't go off, I don't know what a normal physicist do, but we also go off and do weird acoustic visits. So we went to hear this echo as a day off from a conference, an internoise conference, if I remember rightly. So this is really great stories behind this. The Duke of Hamilton was a really weird guy. So he got buried in an Egyptian sarcophagus, which it was in here, and all sorts of kind of things. But unfortunately, one of his I don't know if it was his sons or grandsons, lost all the money by gambling. So the rest of the estate got flattened, but the mausoleum still exists. So we went to visit this and went to measure the reverberation time, which is what this thing's doing here. This is a weird dodecahedron loudspeaker, which we use to measure spaces. And we invested acousticians said, well, that's good, but actually it's not that long, is it? This is a world record that could be broken. To give you here's a graph. Now that's not from when we visited, because when we visited there was quite a lot of people in the room, and we're absorbent. So the better measurement is to get everyone out of the room and have an empty room. So here's a measurement from an empty room. So RT is reverberation time, that's what's on the vertical axis. And frequency, give you a sense, 125 hertz, I don't know, trombone maybe, 4,000 hertz piccolo. This is basically the frequency range of a piano roughly. And if you're talking about speech, it's kind of around 500, 1,000 we would worry about. So we might say, I'm going to pick the middle number here, the reverberation time in that space is about 10 seconds. It varies hugely. All these very reverberant spaces have a lot of bass reverberation, but I'll pick the middle number for now. It's about 10 seconds. That's about St Paul's Cathedral. So there's already a space which is almost as reverberant. Can we do better? Of course we can do better. Let's go to a mausoleum which actually has the ashes of the artist above the door. I just remembered, so it did have his body in there. So if you go to Oslo, this is in Oslo and I visited it, and it's quite an amazing space. So there's a very famous Vigeland Park with very famous sculptures in. His brother was also an artist who mainly did stained glass, and this was his studio and then became his mausoleum. What's the thing that most people go to see when it's not open very often, but I go to see is the frescoes. The murals are quite amazing in this space. I'm trying to think what I can say, what's the youngest person in the room. Some of them are quite explicit, let's put it that way. There's all sorts of kind of dead bodies and skeletons, all sorts of kind of weird stuff. I mean, this guy, considering he was doing stained glass for churches, had quite a dark side, or kind of quite an alternative side. So you go and see the frescoes, but it has the most amazing acoustic in there. And so you can find people recorded in there, you can find recordings. You can find recordings on YouTube if you want to look it up. What's the reverberation time? So it's the red curve there, so you can see it's a bit more than the Hamilton Mausoleum. So I have found something that has beaten the world record. So that was a kind of a good starting point, but thinking, 14 seconds, I bet you could do better than that. So you start looking at other places, and here's a water reservoir. There's one in America which is even bigger than this, but this is the one which is up in Wormit in Scotland. So Wormit in Scotland is up near Dundee. And I learnt about it because someone did a tour of resonant spaces. It was a saxophonist called John Butcher, so I forgot his name, he's on there, who went around playing to audiences in these various kind of different resonant spaces. And he went to this reservoir in Wormit. So I looked it up and could find no mention of it at all. And finally managed to track it down. And it happens to be under the lawn of an architect's house. So when he bought the land to build his house on, he got a free reservoir with it. And he showed me around it one day when I managed to get hold of him. He's very proud of it. He doesn't know what to do with it. I mean, it is vast, this kind of reservoir underneath the space. It was built because Wormit, which is near Dundee, was going to be a big town. But then the Great War struck and it never got filled up. So they made a reservoir which was basically far too big, so they never used it. So it was always unused. But it's got big volume, a lot of concrete, so lots of hard walls, no windows. So it's kind of very good for reverberation. So I'm going to play a little bit of music in there because these very reverberant spaces interest musicians. So what can you do in the space? You've kind of basically got two choices. So one choice is you can play really slowly think of whale songs, play very slowly, because when you play a note in here, it's going to last half a minute before it dies away. So you've got to, you've got to go with the flow. You've got to play very, very slowly. Or the other way is to play very, very fast. So let me play you one of these pieces first of all. So I said we'd play one of these pieces. It's actually 3 notes from one of these pieces. So that's a commercial CD. You can buy it. It's underground. What's it called? It's something from Songs from the Cistern Chapel by Stuart Dempster. Now, so Stuart Dempster is a trombonist. He also plays the didgeridoo. He's an improviser. He's a very good interview about playing in spaces like this. He plays in the American one. He said the problem with improvising in there is if you make a mistake. Because normally when you make a mistake improvising, the note has the good grace to disappear. In this place, it lasts for another minute. So it makes improvisation interesting. So it's a really fascinating sort of demo. So that's one way of doing it, just play very serene, meditative music. The other way is to play really fast. And you may have met this before. If you've gone to church, when the organ, let's say you've got a wedding and everyone's walking out, the organist sometimes goes crazy, don't they? Play really, really fast. You have this fog of sound builds up, but you can still hear the tune coming on top. And that's because all the reverberation is at bass, and the actual tune is a bit higher in frequency, so you can still hear it. So the other way, which is what John Butcher's going to do on his soprano sax, is just play lots of notes and just let the fog build. So the husband who showed me around said, "Oh, it's a marvellous concert. He was really great." And the wife said it was completely unlistenable to. That was the kind of comment they made. So I think they differed on their musical tastes. But it is quite an amazing space to be in. Anyway, so what's the reverberation time in that space? So this is actually the Dan Harpole system, which is the American one because it's a bit bigger. So it's got slightly long reverberation time. And so look at the mid-frequencies, what we're up to, 15, 16 seconds. So we're certainly getting a lot bigger than that. So I thought, well, okay, so we're getting somewhere, but I wonder if there's somewhere even better. And there's an organisation called Subterranean Britannica, which specialises in going in underground Britain. And I contacted them. I emailed the sort of chairman of the, whatever they're called, and said, do you know of anywhere really big, with really heavy walls and no windows, which might kind of do this? And they said, you need to go to Inchindown, and that's where you need to go. And it actually had appeared on one show about a month earlier, and it took a bit of tracking down, but I managed to get into the Inchindown oil depot. So I'll show you in a moment, but this is how you kind of get into it. So it's quite a funny place to walk into because it's on the side of the hill, it's up above Inverness, and you wouldn't know it was there. And you walk down this tunnel, it's a bit like going into a James Bond lair, villain lair, and you walk down this long tunnel, and then suddenly to the left-hand side, you see these sort of pipe work, and that's how you get into the place. You go down the pipes, and this is how they used to maintain it, is through the actual entrance pipes. To give you a sense, the pipe's about that wide, so it's actually a bit narrower than shoulder width. It's about 2 meters long, and you get laid down on that sort of thing, and they sort of kind of shovel you through into the place, like a pizza going into an oven. I was actually chatting to one of the guys who helps get people in and out of it. So if you want to visit it, by the way, there is a place that you can, about once a month, they take about 12 people into it. It's possible now to go. When I went, it wasn't generally open. I had to go through Historic England to get into Historic Scotland to get into the place. But this guy, I think it was the same guy, tried to go down that, got halfway down, screamed blue murder, and to be pulled back out again. So he actually hasn't been into the tank because he's too scared of the entrance. But there we go. I used to cave, so it wasn't so bad. And then when you get inside, that's what it looks like. So what was it doing? Why is that there? Well, it was trying to protect the Royal Navy shipping oil during World War II. So in the build-up to World War II, the Coventry Firth, which is just below this, is really important shipping point. I mean, nowadays what you get there is cruise ships and oil refinery sort of kind of stuff. But in those days, it was the Royal Navy had their ships and they were filling them up with oil. And so they decided they need to make bomb-proof places. And there's actually a series of these around the country. But this is the one that you can actually get into. So it's a quarter of a kilometre long, 250 metres long, about 15 metres wide, about 18 metres tall. So it actually, St Paul's Cathedral, it's actually quite a lot smaller than St Paul's Cathedral. But it was made bomb-proof. So that's why it's got such a long reverberation time. Because basically what they did is they tunnelled it out of the rock. And then they put shuttering in and poured concrete down. So it's half a metre of concrete against bedrock. And so there's nothing vibrating in that wall at all, which is where you get most of the losses of walls. These walls are slightly vibrating as I talk, and that's the reason you're losing energy on them. There's nothing. Then they sealed it. So the reason the carpet's absorbing is because of pores in them. Well, they sealed this because otherwise the oil would seep out. So there's no pores, it's not vibrating, and so it's incredibly hard and reflecting. It's not the nicest of places to work in. This is all the this is the leftover oil on the floor. So everything you take in there gets covered in rubbish. This is supposedly cleaned. All this pipe work is to heat the shipping oil so it would go down the hill. So they could actually get it down the hill to the ships. So we went in there and we kind of fired a gun off and measured what the reverberation time is in the space. And I got one of those for that, which was what was mentioned at the start. And actually today, the guy was ringing me up from the place saying, can I get a copy of this? We want to stick a certificate up on the wall in the tank. So that's what I'm doing when I get home. So longest echo, and we'll have an argument about that in a moment, is 75 seconds. So I'll show you the graph and I'll come back to my arguments with Guinness. So the bottom one there is Hamilton, which was the old world record. This is the new world record. So it's the current world record holder. The argument with Guinness was basically they had this longest echo record. Now in my field, which is architectural acoustics, echo means a discrete event. So it's when you go echo, echo. That's an echo where you can hear the word twice. Reverberation is this, what happens in this room, it's just a blend of sound. You don't hear my voice twice, you just hear a bloom on my voice. So actually this is the longest reverberation time. It's not the longest echo. But I said to that to Guinness, and despite having a PhD in the field, they said, you broke the record for longest echo, that's what your certificate says, go away. So I have a record for something which isn't right, but there we go. It's funny I have the record because actually the room has the record, but there we go. Anyway, so the reverberation time is incredibly long. It's about 40 seconds at mid-frequency. I played a saxophone in there, and so, you play a note and it takes half a minute before it dies away. Now, what you really need to do, if you want to really get in there, is you need to go and get your trombone out, because it'll last 2 minutes after you play a note before it dies away to nothing. Don't go in with a piccolo. It's easy to get a piccolo in there. It's smaller, but it's not as interesting. So you get really extreme reverberations in that space. And I did a calculation. I did a paper on this for a journal, sort of kind of saying this is an interesting. It's a bit like sort of finding a new species. We ought to sort of kind of have a paper on it. And I did a calculation of how long the reverberation would be if the walls were perfectly reflecting, and it was pretty much the same number. So for this volume of room, you can't make it more reverberant. But I'll end up by playing you a little bit of saxophone music in there. So I've been in there quite a lot of time filming for television. This is another Channel 5 programme. I think, if I remember rightly, this one. So you go in there, film. They spend ages filming you. Get really cold, and they say, "Then can you play the saxophone?" And you've got 5 minutes to do it in. So you pick it up and play it quickly. This is actually them filming me just twiddling the keys, but the sound man picked it up on his mobile phone. So it's not the best of recordings. There is one online of me doing it with a decent recorder, but anyway, I've not got that here with me. But you get a sense of what it sounds like to be there. And this is just me playing one instrument. You may not believe this, but everything you hear is reverberation. It's not extra people playing.
Yeah, it's great.
And that's me done.